cold, relentless sheet against the pavement, but Ruby's lungs burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the weather. Behind her, the heavy boots of her stepfather, Gabriel, echoed against the alley walls. "Ruby, get back here, you little thief!" His voice boomed, thick with the scent of cheap liquor and desperation. She didn't have his money. She barely had enough to pay for her community college textbooks. But Gabriel didn't care about facts. He cared about control. Up ahead, a sleek, blacked-out luxury sedan sat idling near the hotel's rear exit. It looked like a fortress on wheels. Ruby saw her opening. The security guard stationed near the rear fender was momentarily distracted, adjusting his earpiece. With a burst of speed she didn't know she possessed, Ruby ducked low, darting past his blind spot. She pulled the rear door handle. It was unlocked. She lunged inside, slamming the door shut and ducking onto the floorboards, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Please," she sobbed under her breath, eyes squeezed shut. "Please don't see me." A heavy silence filled the car, broken only by the soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a stylus against glass. Ruby froze. Slowly she looked up. In the seat beside her sat a man in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the dim glow of an iPad screen. He didn't look at her at first. His fingers moved with surgical precision across a series of encrypted spreadsheets. This wasn't a getaway driver. This was Do-ho, the man who owned the city's shadows. Finally, he paused. He turned his head, his gaze cold, sharp, and terrifyingly calm. He looked at the girl shivering on his floorboards, then back at the security guard frantically looking around outside the window. "You have 5 seconds, Do-ho said, his voice a low, melodic rumble that made her skin crawl. "Explain why I shouldn't let them drag you out of here. Will Ruby find a savior in the man the city fears most, or has she jumped from the frying pan into the fire?" Ruby's breath came in ragged, shallow hitches. Outside the tinted glass, she could see the distorted silhouette of Gabriel packing the sidewalk, his shadow stretching like a predatory beast. He was screaming her name, his fists clenched, but the sound was muffled by the car's heavy soundproofing. Inside, the air smelled of expensive sandalwood and cold leather. Do-ho didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon, and he didn't call the frantic guard currently circling the vehicle. He simply waited, his dark eyes tracking the silver tear track running through the grime on Ruby's cheek. "He's going to kill me," Ruby whispered, her voice cracking. She didn't mean it as a metaphor. She had seen the look in Gabriel's eyes tonight, the look of a man who had finally lost his last bit of humanity to a gambling debt. Do-ho's gaze dropped to her arms. Even in the dim light of the cabin, the purple blossoms of fresh bruises against her dark skin were unmistakable. They were stark, ugly, and very recent. The tapping of his stylus stopped. With a slow, deliberate motion, he set the iPad on the leather seat. "I don't like uninvited guests," he said, his Korean accent light but his tone heavy as lead. "But I dislike men who break their own property even more." "I'm not his property," Ruby snapped, a flash of her natural fire sparking through the terror. A ghost of a smirk touched Do-ho's lips, a dangerous, sharp expression. He leaned over, his large hand reaching toward her. Ruby flinched, bracing for a blow, but instead he pressed a button on the door panel. The locks clicked, a heavy, mechanical sound of finality. "Drive," Do-ho commanded the chauffeur without looking away from Ruby. As the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, Ruby watched through the rear window as Gabriel's receding figure grew smaller, his futile rage vanishing into the rain. She was safe from the devil she knew. But as she looked at the silent, powerful man sitting inches away, she realized she had just entered the lair of a god. The drive to the outskirts of the city was silent, save for the hum of the engine. Ruby sat huddled against the door, her wet clothes soaking into the expensive leather. Do-ho hadn't spoken another word. He had simply returned to his iPad, the blue light reflecting off his sharp cheekbones. When the car finally slowed, it wasn't at a police station or a hospital. They were passing through a massive iron gate guarded by men who looked more like soldiers than security. The estate was a sprawling masterpiece of modern architecture and traditional Korean aesthetics: stone, glass, and shadows. "Out," Duho commanded as the chauffeur opened his door. Ruby hesitated, her legs shaking. As she stepped onto the gravel, the cold night air hit her, making her shiver violently. Duho paused, glancing back at her. Without a word, he unbuttoned his charcoal suit jacket and tossed it at her. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of cedar. "Follow me," he said,
Follow me and
"and
do not touch anything."
He led her into a minimalist foyer where a woman in a sharp black hanbok bowed deeply. Duho spoke rapidly in Korean, his voice clipped. The woman nodded, her eyes flickering to Ruby with a mix of pity and curiosity. "This is Mrs. Park," Duho said, turning to Ruby. "She will show you to a room, you will bathe, you will eat, and tomorrow you will tell me exactly who that man was and why he thinks he owns you." "I told you he doesn't," Ruby started, but Duho was already walking away, his silhouette disappearing into the dark corridor of the mansion. Ruby couldn't sleep. The bed in the guest suite was softer than anything she'd ever felt, but the silence of the mansion was deafening. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like Gabriel's heavy footsteps. She stood by the window, clutching the oversized silk robe Mrs. Park had given her. From this height, she could see the perimeter of the estate. Armed men patrolled with silent efficiency. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. A soft knock at the door made her jump. It was Mrs. Park, carrying a tray of steaming porridge and tea. "Master Duho says you must regain your strength," the woman said softly. "He does not like weakness in his house." "Why did he bring me here?" Ruby asked, her voice a whisper. "He doesn't even know me." Mrs. Park set the tray down and looked Ruby in the eyes. "The chairman is a man of many secrets, Ruby. Perhaps he saw a reflection of something he lost in you. Or perhaps," her voice dropped, "he simply enjoys taking things that others try to steal." As Ruby ate, the reality sank in. She was no longer a runaway. She was a guest of the Sang-Freud, the most feared syndicate in the country. She was safe from Gabriel, but she was now caught in a web far more intricate and dangerous than a common street thug's rage. The next morning, Ruby tried to leave. She dressed in her dried clothes, intent on making it to her shift at the hotel. She couldn't lose her job. It was her only ticket to a real life. She made it as far as the grand staircase before she saw him. Duho was standing in the center of the hall, mid-conversation with a man whose hand was wrapped in a bloody bandage. The air in the room felt thick, charged with a violent energy that made Ruby's blood run cold. "I gave you an order," Duho said to the man, his voice a low hiss. "Failure is not a currency I accept." The man trembled, dropping to his knees. Duho didn't raise his hand. He didn't have to. The sheer weight of his presence was enough to crush the man's spirit. Ruby gasped, the sound echoing in the marble hall. Duho's head snapped toward her. The transition was instant. The murderous cold in his eyes shifted into a dark, piercing curiosity. "Going somewhere, Ruby?" he asked, dismissively waving the injured man away. "I have work," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I have a life. I can't stay here." Duho walked toward her, each step measured. He stopped just inches away, his height towering over her. "Your life is currently being hunted. Your stepfather spent the morning at your hotel looking for you. He was persistent." Ruby felt the color drain from her face. Did he hurt anyone?" "He won't be hurting anyone ever again if you stay here," Duho said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But if you walk out those gates, you are no longer under my protection. Choose wisely." Ruby stared at him, her mind racing. Gabriel wouldn't stop. He was a leech who would suck her dry until there was nothing left. And here was Duho, a man who could make Gabriel disappear with a single phone call. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her heart hammering. Men like you don't do anything for free. Do-ho reached out, his thumb grazing the edge of a bruise on her jaw. The contact was electric, a strange mix of threat and tenderness. Ruby didn't flinch this time. I want a distraction, Do-ho said simply. My rivals think I am a machine. They think I have no pulse, no soul, a ward, a niece or a companion. It humanizes the monster. It makes them careless. You want me to be a prop, Ruby spat, her pride stinging. I want you to be safe, he countered. In exchange, you will live here. You will continue your studies online. You will attend the functions I require you to attend. And in return, I will ensure that Gabriel and anyone else who looks at you with ill intent is erased. It was a bargain with the king of the underworld. Ruby looked at his hand, still hovering near her face. She thought of the cold rain, the heavy boots in the alley, and the hopelessness of her 18 years. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was dry and warm. Deal, she whispered.
Deal.
Do-ho's grip tightened, not painfully but possessively. Good. Welcome to the family, Ruby. Try not to break any more of my rules. Life in Do-ho's estate was far from the idle luxury Ruby had imagined. By the third day, she realized she wasn't just a guest. She was a project. Do-ho didn't want a fragile porcelain doll. He wanted a woman who could stand beside him without trembling. If you are to be seen with me, Do-ho said, watching her from the edge of the private gym, you cannot look like a victim. Your chin stays up. Your eyes stay level. He hired a tutor to help her with her college courses remotely, but he also brought in a retired operative named Han to teach her basic self-defense. Ruby's muscles ached, and her hands were raw from striking pads, but for the first time in her life, the physical pain felt like progress rather than punishment. One evening, Do-ho entered the gym as she was finishing. He handed her a cold bottle of water, his fingers lingering against hers. You're faster than you look, Ruby.
You are faster than you
I've
look,
spent my
Ruby.
whole life running, she replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. I'm tired of being fast. I want to be heavy. I want to be someone who can't be pushed around. Do-ho's gaze darkened with something akin to respect. In this house, weight isn't about size, it's about will. Keep training. Despite the high walls, the ghost of Gabriel haunted Ruby's dreams. She woke up screaming one night, convinced his heavy hand was around her throat. Within seconds, her door flew open. It wasn't a guard. It was Do-ho, dressed only in silk trousers, a dark tattoo of a dragon winding up his muscular torso. He didn't say a word. He simply sat on the edge of her bed. He's not here,
He's not
Do-ho
here.
said, his voice a low, grounding vibration. He'll find a way, Ruby whispered, her chest heaving. He always does. He's like a parasite. Do-ho reached out, his hand cupping the back of her neck, pulling her forehead toward his. It was an intimate, possessive gesture that silenced her panic. I have my men watching the hotel and your old apartment. If he breathes too loud in this city, I will know. You are under the protection of the sang-froid. That is a death sentence for anyone who touches you. Ruby looked into his eyes and saw a vacuum of mercy. For the first time, the monster in the room wasn't the one she was afraid of. He was the one guarding the door. The deal finally came due. Do-ho required Ruby to accompany him to a high-stakes gala hosted by a rival conglomerate. Mrs. Park spent hours transforming Ruby. She was poured into a floor-length, emerald green silk gown that complemented her deep skin tone perfectly. Gold jewelry adorned her neck like armor. When she stepped into the foyer, Do-ho actually paused. His stoic mask slipped for a fraction of a second. You look, he started, then cleared his throat. Passable. Passable, Ruby smirked, adjusting her clutch. You're a terrible liar, Do-ho. He offered his arm, and she took it. As they entered the gala, the room went silent. The whispers were immediate. Who is the black girl on the arm of the Iron Boss?
Since when does Do-ho keep company?
Ruby felt the weight of 100 stares, but she remembered Do-ho's words. She kept her chin up. She kept her eyes level. She wasn't Ruby the cleaning girl anymore. She was the mystery of the underworld. The gala was a minefield of polite insults and hidden threats. Duho moved through the crowd like a shark, Ruby anchored to his side. However, the evening took a dark turn when a man named Mr. Shin, a known rival of Duho, approached them. "A beautiful acquisition, Chairman," Shin sneered, his eyes roaming over Ruby in a way that made her skin crawl. "Is she for sale, or just for show?" Ruby felt Duho's entire body turn into a block of ice. The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "She is neither," Duho replied, his voice dangerously soft. "She is the only person in this room you aren't allowed to speak to. If you look at her again, I'll take your eyes." Shin laughed, but it was forced. He stepped back, sensing the genuine lethality radiating from Duho. But as they turned to leave, Ruby saw a familiar face in the service corridor, a man in a cheap, ill-fitting waiter's jacket. It was Gabriel. He had found a way in. Ruby's heart plummeted into her stomach. Gabriel was watching her, his eyes bloodshot and full of a manic greed. He realized who she was with, but instead of being afraid, he looked like a man who had just found a winning lottery ticket. "Ruby, is something wrong?" Duho asked, noticing her sudden rigidity. I need to go to the restroom," she lied, her voice shaking. She needed to handle this. She didn't want Duho to see her as a liability, and she didn't want Gabriel to get killed in a room full of witnesses, not for his sake, but for hers. She slipped away into the quiet hallway leading to the restrooms. Before she could reach the door, a rough hand grabbed her arm and yanked her into a storage closet. "Found you, you little brat," Gabriel hissed, his breath stinking of gin. "You think you can hide in a palace like this? You think a man like that wants you for anything but a toy? Give me the jewelry, Ruby. Give it to me now, or I'll tell everyone exactly where you came from." Ruby looked at her stepfather, the man who had ruined her childhood, and realized she wasn't that scared little girl anymore. She reached for the small, concealed blade Han had taught her to carry in her garter.
Get your hands off me, Gabriel.
She whispered, her voice cold and steady, "before I show you what I've learned." In the cramped darkness of the storage closet, Gabriel's grip tightened on Ruby's wrist, his fingers digging into the fresh silk of her gown. "You think you're a queen now," he sneered, his face inches from hers. "You're nothing but a gutter rat in a green dress. Give me the necklace, or I'll scream so loud your boss will know exactly what kind of trash he picked up." Ruby didn't scream. She didn't beg. She remembered Han's voice in the gym. Leverage is more powerful than strength. She twisted her arm with a sharp, practiced snap, breaking his hold, and in one fluid motion, she pressed the small, concealed blade against Gabriel's jugular. The cold steel silenced him instantly. "I'm not that girl anymore, Gabriel," she whispered, her voice vibrating with a decade of suppressed rage. "If you ever come near me, my hotel, or this estate again, I won't need Duho to kill you. I'll do it myself." For a heartbeat, she saw genuine terror in his eyes. But then, the closet door swung open with a bang that shook the walls. Duho stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking out the hallway light. He looked like an avenging god. His eyes dropped to the blade in Ruby's hand, then to the trembling, pathetic man cowering against the shelves. "Ruby," Duho said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "step away from him." "Duho, I can handle this," she argued, her hand still steady. "I know you can," he replied, stepping into the room. He gently took the blade from her hand and tucked it back into her garter, his touch lingering for a second. "But you are a guest in my world now, and in my world we don't just threaten, we finish." He grabbed Gabriel by the throat, lifting the larger man off his feet with effortless, terrifying strength. Gabriel gasping for air, his legs kicking uselessly. "This is the man?" Duho asked Ruby, never breaking eye contact with Gabriel. "The one who made you cry?" "Yes," Ruby whispered. "Take him to the basement at the warehouse," Duho commanded two guards who had appeared like ghosts behind him. Make sure he understands that Ruby is no longer a name he is permitted to speak. Back in the car, the silence was heavy. Ruby was shaking, not from fear of Gabriel, but from the adrenaline of finally fighting back. She looked down at her hands, still vibrating. Duho reached across the seat and took both of her hands in his. He didn't let go. "You did well," he said. "Most people freeze. You chose to bleed him." "I hated it," Ruby admitted, a tear finally escaping. "I hated that he still has that power over me. That I had to become like you just to survive him." Duho pulled her closer, tucking her head under his chin. It was the first time she felt the heartbeat beneath his suit, steady, rhythmic, and strangely comforting. "You didn't become like me, Ruby. You became yourself. The girl who survived 10 years of him is finally winning." For the rest of the ride, she stayed in his arms, the scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco acting as a shield against the rest of the world. The next week was a blur of recovery. Gabriel was gone. Duho wouldn't say where, and Ruby didn't ask. But a new tension was growing in the house. It wasn't the tension of danger, but of something unsaid between them. Ruby found Duho in his study late one night, a bottle of scotch open on his desk. He was staring at a photograph of a woman who looked remarkably like him, but with softer eyes.
My
"My
sister.
sister," he said before Ruby could ask. "She wasn't a fighter. She was like you once, full of dreams that had nothing to do with blood. The rivals used her to get to me. She didn't survive." Ruby walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Is that why you saved me? Because you couldn't save her?" Duho stood up, turning to face her. The distance between them vanished. "At first, yes, but now," he trailed off, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Now I realize I didn't save you, Ruby. You're the only thing in this house that isn't a ghost." The air in the study shifted, turning thick and electric. Duho's hand found the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. Ruby could feel the heat radiating from him, a stark contrast to the cold exterior he showed the world. "I am a dangerous man, Ruby," he warned, his voice a low growl against her ear. "There is no peace in my bed, only shadows." "I've lived in the shadows my whole life," Ruby whispered, reaching up to unknot his tie. "At least with you I'm not alone." He kissed her then, a desperate, hungry collision that tasted of scotch and long-denied longing. He lifted her onto the mahogany desk, scattering papers and tablets to the floor. His hands, usually so precise and lethal, were surprisingly reverent as they moved over her skin. That night, the boundaries between protector and protected dissolved. There were no words, only the rhythmic sound of the rain outside and the heat of two souls finding sanctuary in the dark. Ruby realized that while Gabriel had tried to break her body, Duho was the only one who had ever truly seen her soul. The line has been crossed. Ruby is no longer just a ward. She is the Mafia boss's woman. But in the underworld, love is a liability. Will his rivals use their new bond to destroy them both? The sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of Duho's master suite, casting long, golden stripes across the silk sheets. Ruby woke to the unfamiliar weight of a solid arm draped across her waist. For a moment, she panicked, her muscle memory bracing for Gabriel's cruelty. Then she smelled the sandalwood. She turned slightly, watching Duho sleep. Without the sharp glasses and the cold, calculating gaze, he looked almost human. The jagged scar running down his shoulder, a remnant of a knife fight years ago, was a reminder of the world he inhabited. He stirred, his dark eyes snapping open. Within a second, the predator was back, his hand instinctively reaching for the handgun tucked under his pillow before he realized it was only her. "Easy," Ruby whispered, placing her hand over his. Duho exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. He pulled her closer, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "I am not used to waking up with someone who doesn't want to kill me," he muttered. "Give it time," Ruby teased, though her heart was racing. "I still haven't forgiven you for that passable comment at the gala." He chuckled, a rare, genuine sound, and kissed the top of her head. But the moment was broken by the sharp, rhythmic rapping on the heavy oak door. It was his second-in-command, Jun. "Chairman," Jun's voice was urgent. "The Shin Syndicate, they've moved on the southern docks. They know about the girl." The sanctuary of the bedroom was gone. Within an hour, the estate was a hive of activity. Men were checking weapons, and the encrypted monitors in the war room were glowing with satellite feeds. Duho stood at the head of the table, his suit perfectly pressed, his eyes like flint. Ruby stood in the doorway, feeling the sudden chill of being the liability everyone was whispering about. "Shin thinks she is your weakness," Jun said, pointing to a grainy photo of Ruby entering the gala. "He thinks he can trade her life for the port territories." Duho didn't look up from the map. "He thinks she is a prize to be taken. He doesn't realize she is a blade I have sharpened myself." He looked at Ruby, his gaze intense. "Go to the safe room. Mrs. Park will stay with you. Do not leave until I come for you." "I can help," Ruby said, her voice firm. "I know how Gabriel thinks, if Shin is using him to get information." "Gabriel is handled," Duho snapped, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This isn't a street fight anymore, Ruby. This is a war. Stay put." The safe room was a windowless bunker hidden behind a bookshelf in the library. It was filled with monitors, water, and enough ammunition to hold off an army. Ruby sat on the edge of the small cot, the hum of the ventilation system the only sound. Hours passed. Then the door hissed open. Duho entered, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, the scent of gunpowder clinging to him. He looked exhausted but alive.
Did you
"Did you
win?
win?"
Barely.
Ruby
It was
asked,
close.
rushing to him. "I sent a message," he said, pulling her into a fierce, almost desperate embrace. The adrenaline of the skirmish was still pulsing through him. He tasted of metal and fire as he crushed his lips to hers. They didn't make it to the cot. Against the cold steel wall of the bunker, the world outside, the guns, the territory, the blood faded away. This was their only reality, the frantic, silent language of two people who knew that every breath could be their last. In the shadows of the safe room, Ruby realized that she wasn't just his ward or his distraction. She was his gravity. The next morning, the high-tech security of the estate was breached, not by an army but by a ghost. Ruby was in the kitchen with Mrs. Park when the power cut out. The backup generators groaned but failed to kick in. In the sudden darkness, a familiar, raspy laugh echoed from the service entrance. "Did you really think a fancy lock could keep me out, Ruby?" Gabriel. He looked skeletal, his eyes wide with a drug-fueled frenzy. He held a grease-stained envelope in one hand and a jagged piece of glass in the other. He had found the one weakness in Duho's armor, the underground service tunnels used for waste removal, tunnels he had learned about while working as a janitor years ago. "I told Shin everything," Gabriel hissed, stepping into the dim light of the emergency red lanterns. "Every scar, every fear. He paid me well, Ruby, more than you ever did." "You sold me out," Ruby said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. She reached into the pocket of her robe, her fingers curling around the grip of the small pistol Duho had insisted she carry. "I'm your father," Gabriel screamed, lunging forward. Ruby didn't wait for him to reach her. She didn't wait for Duho to save her. She stepped back, leveled the weapon, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the kitchen, shattering the silence. Gabriel fell, the glass slipping from his hand as he slumped against the industrial refrigerator. He wasn't dead, but the shot to his leg had ended the chase forever. The doors burst open. Duho and his men flooded the room, guns drawn. Duho stopped when he saw Ruby. She was standing perfectly still, the gun still raised, her face a mask of iron. He walked over to her, gently prying the weapon from her fingers. He looked at Gabriel, then back at her. "I told you," Ruby whispered, her voice trembling now that the adrenaline was fatting. "I told him I'd do it myself." Duho looked at the whimpering man on the floor, then at the woman who had finally severed her own chains. He didn't offer words of comfort. He simply took her hand and led her out of the room. "Jun," Du-ho said over his shoulder, "clean this up and call Shin. Tell him the girl he wanted to kidnap just took down his best informant. Tell him she's coming for him next." Ruby has shed her last shred of innocence. She is no longer a victim. She is a player in the game. But as the war with Shin reaches its boiling point, can she and Du-ho survive the fire they've started? The shooting of Gabriel changed the atmosphere of the estate. The guards no longer looked at Ruby as a guest. They looked at her with a wary, newfound respect. She had done what many of them hadn't, defended the chairman's inner sanctum with her own hand. "You're brooding," Ruby said. Stepping into the war room, Du-ho was staring at a digital map of the city's shipping district. "Shin is desperate," Du-ho replied without looking up. "The information Gabriel gave him was enough to pinpoint our supply routes. He's going to hit the main warehouse tonight. He thinks I'll be there." Ruby walked to the table, her eyes scanning the blueprints. "He thinks you'll be there because that's what a boss does. But Shin doesn't know about me. He thinks I'm the weakness. Let's use that." Du-ho finally looked at her, his brow furrowing. "No, I won't use you as bait." "It's not bait if I'm the hunter," Ruby countered, her voice steady. "I know how these men think. They expect a girl who cowers. Let me be the distraction while you flank them from the docks. It's the only way to end this tonight." Du-ho stared at her for a long time. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had led her to jump into his car weeks ago. He realized then that he couldn't keep her in a cage, no matter how gilded. The warehouse was a cavernous space of shipping containers and shadows. Ruby stood in the center of the loading bay, dressed in a dark tactical jacket, her heart racing. In her hand was a burner phone, its screen glowing in the dark. A fleet of black SUVs screeched to a halt outside. Moments later, Shin entered, flanked by a dozen gunmen. He smiled when he saw Ruby standing alone. "The chairman's little bird," Shin mocked, his voice echoing. "Where is he, Ruby? Did he send you to beg for mercy?" "He didn't send me," Ruby said, her voice amplified by the silence. "I came to tell you that the information you bought from Gabriel was a lie. We knew you were coming before you even left your office." Shin's smile vanished. He raised his hand to signal his men, but the red dots of sniper lasers appeared on his chest. "You're in the wrong house, Shin," Ruby whispered. The warehouse erupted into chaos. The sang-froid men, hidden among the rafters and containers, opened fire. Du-ho emerged from the shadows like a wraith, his suppressed pistol clicking rhythmically as he moved toward Shin. Ruby didn't just hide. She moved with the precision Han had taught her, staying low and providing cover for Jun as they pushed the invaders back toward the entrance. In the middle of the crossfire, Du-ho and Shin finally faced each other. Shin lunged with a blade, but Du-ho was faster. He caught Shin's wrist, the sound of bones snapping echoing over the gunfire. "You touched what was mine," Du-ho hissed, his voice devoid of any humanity. He didn't kill him instantly. He wanted Shin to see the man who had outplayed him. And then he looked past Shin to see Ruby. She had just disarmed a gunman, her face splattered with oil and dust, her eyes fixed on his. The war was won in minutes. The Shin syndicate was decapitated, their leader slumped on the concrete floor. Hours later, the adrenaline had faded into a bone-deep exhaustion. They were back at the estate, the silence of the night returning. Ruby was in the bathroom, trying to scrub the grime and the memory of the muzzle flashes from her skin. The door opened, and Du-ho stepped in. He didn't say anything. He simply took the washcloth from her trembling hand and began to wipe the soot from her shoulder. "You could have died," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed. "So could you," she replied, turning to face him. He pulled her into him, his grip almost painful in its intensity. He kissed her with a ferocity that spoke of every fear he had felt watching her in that warehouse. They didn't make it to the bedroom. In the steam and the soft light of the bathroom, they clung to each other, two broken people who had built a kingdom out of shadows. For Do-ho, she was the only light he had ever known. For Ruby, he was the only man who had ever given her the power to save herself. 6 months later, the community college campus was bustling with students. Ruby sat on a bench, a textbook in her lap and a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked like any other student, but the black sedan idling at the curb and the discreet man in a suit standing 20 paces away said otherwise. Gabriel was gone, deported and blacklisted, never to step foot in the country again. Her mother's debts were paid. A shadow fell over her book. She looked up to see Do-ho. He wasn't wearing his glasses today, and his expression was relaxed as a mafia boss could ever be. He handed her a small velvet box. "Is this another contract?" Ruby joked, though her breath hitched. "No," Do-ho said, sitting beside her. "The contracts are over. This is a choice." Inside the box was a ring, but not a traditional one. It was a black diamond, sharp and brilliant. "The city is quiet, Ruby. The sang-froid is stable, but I find I don't care for the view from the top unless you're standing there with me." Ruby looked at the car, then back at the man who had changed her destiny. She wasn't the terrified girl running from a stepfather anymore. She was a survivor, a partner, and a force to be reckoned with. She took the ring and slid it onto her finger. "I told you once, Do-ho, I'm tired of running." He smiled, a real full smile, and kissed her hand. "Then from now on we walk." As they walked toward the car, the world looked different. The shadows weren't places to hide anymore. They were a kingdom they ruled together. Ruby started that night as a girl running for her life, only to find it in the arms of the city's most dangerous man. From the cold leather of Do-ho's car to the fire of the warehouse docks, their journey proves that sometimes your greatest protector is the one the rest of the world fears. What was your favorite moment? But now we want to hear from you. Was it the moment Ruby finally stood up to Gabriel in the gala halls? Or perhaps the quiet, intense bond that grew between her and Do-ho in the safe room? Comment below and let us know which part of Ruby and Do-ho's story touched your heart the most. If you enjoyed this tale of survival, power, and unexpected love, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps us bring more of these stories to life. Share this video with someone who loves a good protector trope, and most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter in our cinematic universe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.